Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome back to another faction guide for Divide et Impera, the mod for Rome 2. Today we're going to be looking at Syracuse, which is undoubtedly and inarguably one of the hardest campaigns in Divide et Impera. You start out with a hellish start position sandwiched between Rome and Carthage, and you're essentially in a fight for survival from the very onset of the campaign. Neither of these powers are agreeable to your existence, and you will have to devise a strategy to survive a tumultuous early game which inevitably involves war with both of these factions. Now, otherwise, you don't have a particularly strong roster, although you do have a couple of tools that can help you prosper and have a chance in your campaign. So without further ado, let's look at the campaign map and figure out how we're going to survive as Syracuse. Alrighty everybody, so this is your start position as Syracuse, and unsurprisingly start out with one settlement, that being Syracuse. You are a city-state, so you just start out with the one settlement and you have no more than that. Now when it comes to this settlement, it is unfortunately sandwiched between Rome and Carthage on either side. Carthage to the south and Rome to the north. And while neither of these factions hate you from the onset, as you can see, they both are apparently neutral towards you, that is nothing but a lie, for they both covet your lands, and frankly, cultivating diplomatic relationships with either of these factions is a bloody and expensive waste of time. And I've tested this numerous times. Like, I've gotten trade agreements with both factions. I have gotten non-aggression pacts with both factions. I've spent exorbitant amounts of money on these treaties, and both Rome and Carthage will break a non-aggression pact with you and just straight up attack you. Like, they won't even cancel the non-aggression pact. They will take your money, sign the treaty, and then 2 turns later just attack you anyway. That's how little they care about your autonomy as Syracuse. So I wouldn't even spend money attempting to befriend one of these guys. Just understand that they both seek your destruction, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So because of that, you essentially have 2 options when it comes to your early game strategy as Syracuse. And these strategies have nothing to do with expansion. These strategies have to simply do with survival. That's the problem with this start position. Like, you're not thinking, oh, how do I leverage my resources to try to grow as large as possible, as quickly as I can, without overextending myself. That's like the normal dilemma that you have in a campaign, right? But in the case of Syracuse, it's nothing about that at all. Instead, you are merely trying to survive this early game. So one of these strategies I mentioned is, of course, to take the rest of Sicily and try to hold it there. And I have done that, but I found this strategy to be pretty unpractical because both Carthage and Rome can assault you from so many angles. Like, Carthage will probably just send troops from North Africa to hit Acrugs, or what is this? Acrugs, yeah, directly. And if you don't have an army within range of this, they'll just simply take it with ease and then use this as a bridgehead to re-expand across all of Sicily. Otherwise, Panormus can be attacked from Corrales, and they'll do this as well. Of course, the Romans could head south from Cassentia and just cross over into Sicily and attack Syracuse or one of these minor settlements directly. And also, the other thing is that Carthage does have some city-states, right? Sorry, not city-states. Some client states. And these clients tend to be in Numidia minding their own business. But I'll tell you this, guys, that when you're trying to hold Sicily against Carthage and you declare, they declare war on you or you declare war on them, whatever it might be, those client states will join in. And they will attack Sicily as well. In 3 of my trial runs, the Numidians crossed over from North Africa and attacked Acrugs too. So not only are you fighting against Carthage and Rome, 2 very wealthy factions that can send plenty of armies at you, but there'll also be the occasional desert nomad army that just comes in from here full of Berber horsemen and the other good units that they have, and they'll also pose a bit of a threat. So more or less, holding out as Syracuse, it's like taking on wave after wave of zombies, but the zombies are just as strong as you. Although the early Syracusan roster from turn 1 does have some tools. Now, we're not talking about amazing tools. Like, I would argue, in fact, I would say it's pretty much a fact that Epirus has a far better turn 1 roster than that of Syracuse. However, Syracuse does have more on offer than many other Greek factions, at least on turn 1. You have your regular hoplites on turn 1, which is good. There's nothing exceptional about these hoplites, but of course, a hoplite is a good hoplite. You have decent cavalry coverage. Like, sometimes it takes maybe upgrading your barrack one time in order to get, like, citizen cavalry, like something that's not this crappy Greek javelin cavalry, but no. On turn 1, you have your generic citizen cavalry, and you have the Sicilian horsemen, which are a significant upgrade on this javelin cavalry. Like, you get better melee attack, better defense, you actually have some armor, some morale, while maintaining the same speed and skirmishing abilities. So, ultimately, you do have two, we could say, not game-breaking horsemen, not excellent horsemen, but you do have two competent mid-horsemen. But what your real gem is these Samnite medium infantry, because in Divide et Impera, just like in the base game, Samnites are king. Samnites are awesome. I mean, look at this unit, guys. 14 melee attack, 12 melee defense is great. 16 charge bonus isn't amazing, but it is kind of representative of heavy Italian infantry, heavy Romanesque infantry. You know, these guys aren't going to be the most effective on the charge, but they'll hold your enemy at bay for long. And, you know, 23 weapon damage and 4 armor penetration, while not excellent, is sufficient with those combat stats on the top to make sure that these guys are beasts. The other thing that's absolutely mind-boggling about this unit is that it has 32, well, to upgrade it, it's typically 30, but a base of 30 armor at the beginning of the game, which for, like, a turn 1 sword is pretty much unheard of. Like, I cannot name another sword unit that a Hellenistic or Hellenic faction gets on turn 1 that'll give you 30 armor. So that's the thing, guys. You basically should just be spamming this unit in abundance, because this is what you have as an advantage. Like, for all the pain that you have of being surrounded by two monstrous empires on turn 1, you do have the Samnites, who are just a vicious and extremely good unit. Just, that's the best thing. Like, this combined with some early horsemen is really what's going to make your faction good. In all honesty, I would avoid hoplites. I feel like having a Samnite based army is just way better. Now, for your skirmishers, there's really nothing great here, so just get your Greek slinger. It's the best of the generic Greek skirmishers by far, but also you are going to have money problems. Like, you don't have excellent income on turn 1, and Samnites are expensive, so maybe that is justification for going for archers, just to kind of cheap out. And if you do run out of money, then you can always go for Sicilian levies. This is a cheap unit that's still serviceable and can do some damage. Now, when it comes to your mercenary recruitment, you have 3 options here. They're all reasonably good in their own right. Like, none of these are exceptional value for money, but they can all be used, so you can consider getting a mercenary. Now, when it comes to Syracuse itself, it does basically have every single population you'd want. Like, if I get rid of these Samnites, you'll immediately notice that yeah, you have like 4,500 middle class, which means you could just make this first army full of anything you want. 4,500 nobles, which is just excellent. Like, you do start out with enough of every population to basically do whatever you want, which is nice. Although it's not like an inexhaustible number, but in all honesty, my early game strategy involves leaving Syracuse, so I would just recruit as many Samnites as you can feasibly afford, jack up your attacks all the way, get some cavalry, and then fill out the rest of maybe cheap archers and levies, you know, if whatever necessity demands. And then I would load your men on ships, and I would attack Greece. I would go and colonize somewhere else. Let's call this a colonial relocation, because I just feel like holding Syracuse is absolutely unfeasible. Like, from the city, yes, you can, like, hold on for dear life. You absolutely can handle a Roman or Carthaginian army from the safety of your battlements and with the aid of your garrison. Like, don't get me wrong, you absolutely can. However, I just feel like that's not a way to play a campaign, and I honestly don't believe that you can hold all of Sicily. Like, after taking these 2 settlements, your income only goes up marginally, and your defensive capabilities only go up marginally as a response, but your defensive needs increase so much. Like, holding all 3 of these basically involve having multiple armies, 2 or 3 good armies in the field. You're going to be assaulted from all angles, and it's just nasty. So in order to actually have a chance at expanding, I would just build up a good army, whatever you could financially afford, and just sail over to Greece, you know. A good province with solid populations that you can use from the onset, and with 100% Hellenic culture, so you don't have to deal with public order and just attack. And now, just depending on what's going on over here financially, as well as like when Syracuse will lose, because Syracuse will get taken eventually, I would either attack Sparta or I would attack Crete. If you have time, I would use the extra time to go over to Crete. It's just a really, really defensible and a nice place from which to launch your campaign. If you do want to defend Syracuse, because you actually, like, I don't know, have a deep interest in Syracuse as a city, you just really, really, really want to keep Syracuse alive, good luck. But in my playthroughs, I've just not seen a feasible way to do it. You just will get crushed eventually. You know, it's not even a matter of just being able to win battles or not. It's just a matter of being able to win 50 consecutive battles while your army is not recovering, and while you financially have no capacity to increase your armies either. It just seems completely unbelievable of a task to be able to hold Syracuse, and neither Carthage nor Rome will want you as an ally, so I just think it's best to expand over to Crete or to Greece. But that's my advice for the start position. Let's go look at the buffs and debuffs of Syracuse, because let me tell you, they are utterly useless. Now, when it comes to the debuffs and buffs that you get as a faction in Rome 2 Divide et Impera, I think I've just repeatedly mentioned that the vast majority of them are kind of like a quality of life thing. Like, there's only a couple of factions that have buffs and debuffs that radically change the way that you play the faction. Like, you know, the steppe nomads, who we'll make guides on later, you know, they have like a pretty significant discount on horsemen, making all cavalry options feasible for them, but basically not financially executable for any other faction. So there's only a couple, like Pergamon has that increased diplomacy with other factions, and there's just others that have some interesting ones that actually improve things, but the vast majority will just give you like a little bit of a quality of life improvement. Syracuse's buffs don't give you a quality of life improvement. They have just generally been completely useless. Like, for example, you have the colonist trait, which apparently gives you special population technologies. I have found this mostly to just be in the form of buildings. Like, you do get a couple of buildings, usually barracks and stuff like that for these other factions, but for Syracuse, this actually is utterly meaningless. I have not been able to discover what special population technologies Syracuse gets, so this actually is a total write-off. You also get plus 10% melee defense during battles in your own or allied territory, which, to be fair, but does help you defend your capital city. But as I mentioned, defending against Rome and Carthage simultaneously when you're just one city is impossible. It is impossible to do over time. You eventually will just get overwhelmed by the sheer number of men attacking you at all times. But plus 10%, while advantageous, will not help you. But overall, this is the only thing that even has a chance of being useful. But if you relocate far enough from Rome and Carthage, then you can just play a campaign where you don't have to be all that defensive, and then this will once again become pointless. This increased research rate buff has been completely and utterly just not useful to me. Like, the increased research rate that you have as a Hellenic faction, the one that you get up here at plus 5%, actually has been tangibly useful. Like, I have seen in all of these factions, your time to research decrease by 1 turn on average for all technologies. But when I do research as the Syracusans, let's go find them again, I haven't seen any change. It's been exactly the same. So I literally have not seen Academy's Eureka have any impact, and I just wonder what percent this represents, because it seems to me that it's less than 5%. Increased capital siege holdout time. Now, why would this be useful? I wonder. I just don't know. Like, the thing is that your capital, which is Syracuse, is a city on the water, meaning that it'll have a really high holdout time no matter what, so having a like +1 holdout time is terrible, and also I've never had like a settlement starved into submission in Rome 2, so complete and utter waste of something. And then your debuff is increased empire maintenance, which is like one of the worst ones. It just increases the cost of everything. So not only are you being assaulted on all angles from the very onset, but just running, just existing as a faction is more expensive. So ultimately, these buffs and debuffs just increase the challenge and solidify Syracuse as one of the hardest factions. But let's just go see whether the roster is going to bail them out somewhat. But spoiler alert, the roster is okay, but not great. Now this is Syracuse's roster, and I think that you could probably see as I scroll down here that this roster doesn't have a ton in it. It's definitely a pretty small roster for Divide at Impera. You can see particularly for Hellenic faction, your cavalry options are quite scarce. And let me tell you that your phalanxes, as you can see right here, only 3 phalanxes, no pikes. And the scarcity isn't like justified by a lot of great options. So just overall, this roster isn't great, but let's just go over it to see why that is. Now, to start with your generals, your first general is just your typical generic hoplite general. This is what you get if you're just trying to look for a cheap general, but I wouldn't recommend it because ultimately, why would you want to cheap out on your general's bodyguard? If he dies in a battle, your troops lose morale rapidly and run away, so yeah, I would just never recruit a hoplite as a general unless I'm just desperate, and that's why you would. Now, your next general is your Syracusan Guard, and this is also a hoplite general, but I just want to specify that of these 2 hoplites, they're both just completely average. Like, this is an average generic hoplite. There's nothing special about a Syracusan hoplite at all. And this is your average Syracusan Guard. It'll be outperformed by the best elite hoplites in the game, such as the Shield Bearers of Macedon or Seleucids, or, you know, your elite Spartans. You know, it'll be outperformed by the best hoplites in the game, but these hoplites square up against the vast majority of hoplites, making them good, but not great. Now moving on, this is the best unit that Syracuse has in its roster by far, the Syracusan Heavy Infantry. These guys come alive in the 4X reform, so that's when you get them, but they are essentially Roman units. Like, this is by, you know, I was about to say by far, but I just have to say, this is simply the best Greek melee infantry unit in the game. It's better than your Seleucid Silver Shields. It's better than your Pergamese Guard Infantry, which I was touting as the best Greek melee infantry that I've seen in the game. You know, I guess I was saving the best for last, but these Syracusan Heavy Infantry are the best Greek melee infantry. And it just isn't even close. Like, we're not the most armored. 38 armor is like your standard elite infantry armor. So we have the standard one, but where they really shine is 28 weapon damage is really good for a swordsman. 20 charge is good. Like, at least it's not like 18 or 19 or even 16 like a lot of Romans have. But then 13 melee attack and 16 melee defense is monstrous. It outperforms the overwhelming majority of Roman infantry, with the exception of just for most elite units. Like, if we just get like your basic Roman troop out, let's not even say basic, like your standard Roman late game unit, you'll notice here that your Syracusan Heavy Infantry has more melee attack, more melee defense, more charge bonus, more weapon damage. The only thing that the Roman has more of is 3 more armor, which is a negligible stat. 3 more armor isn't going to turn the tide of battle when all of these combat stats are better. And literally every single statistic here, with the exception of morale, which is equal, and armor, which is 3 lesser, and your armor penetration and bonus versus infantry is better for the Syracusan Heavy Infantry. So these guys are better than standard Imperial Legionaries. In fact, we can try to find what unit will match them, and I think that we're starting to look at like Imperial Veteran Legionaries if we want to find a unit that's capable of beating them in combat. In fact, this Imperial Veteran Legionary, they have slightly better charge, but slightly less melee attack. Same armor. Same armor. Better bonus. I mean, honestly, it's a toss-up which one's better. So I hope it demonstrates the all-powerful nature of his Syracusan heavy infantry. It's an absolutely fabulous unit. And looking at the rest of your melee infantry, you'll have a couple more that are also good, just depending on which part of the campaign. But you're going to have a decent melee infantry option for every part. Now, you have one cavalry general as well. It's your Syracusan Royal Cavalry. Now, this cavalry is not elite in terms of armor. Like, 38 armor is okay, but most, like, elite general cavalry units in this game will have, like, a good 41 armor. But this unit compensates by having a greater melee attack and kind of not better melee defense, but you know, 13 and 14 is pretty good when it comes to V stats. Now, where this unit is pretty bad is in terms of charge bonus. 40 charge bonus is not great. I would have loved to see like a 50 charge bonus on this cavalry. So because of those reasons, like I have to say that this is objectively a competent melee cavalry unit, but it's really not that good. Like at 40 charge bonus, it makes it far weaker when it comes to hammer and anvil cavalry. Like, any cavalry can help you with a flank charge, but ultimately 40 isn't that good. Like, this cavalry unit is essentially only a melee cavalry. That's all it is. So if you want to have a cavalry general, obviously go for this. Like, having a cavalry general always enhances the mobility of this unit. It helps you keep your general alive. But ultimately, this is not a really good cavalry unit. This unit's kind of meh. Now moving on to your melee infantry, you start out with your Sicilian levies, and you know, to have a sword levy unit is kind of a bonus. Like a lot of factions only have a spear levy, so this is kind of good. This is an extremely cheap unit, 225 men, but that's kind of where the benefits of it end. It has really bad melee attack and melee defense, considering that it doesn't do much armor penetration. 23 weapon damage is decent, but 16 charge is extremely mediocre. Pair that with 8 armor and 39 base morale. This is just not a particularly reliable unit. You're only going to use this in a very defensive and kind of garrison style army. Don't have these guys on your flanks. You absolutely will not have them secure. And they're just so much better units to recruit as Syracusans. If you're looking for an actual combat troop, I would highly recommend that you instead just go for your Syracusan coastal levies, because at least this unit can hold for a bit since it has better melee defense and more armor. I just feel like these levies, like, they'll help you against cavalry a lot more. So if you're having like a unit on your flank, you know, you want a unit that's going to be able to take the onrush of cavalry and actually be able to deflect them. This unit's going to get wrecked. This unit will actually do some damage because it has a bonus versus cavalry. And yeah, just the Sicilian levies, I just feel like they don't have much of an actual application, although it's something that you have. Now, moving on, you have a Sicilian footman. Now, you do need your level 2 barrack for this, so you're not going to get these guys immediately, but this is just a great quality unit that's available from turn 1. Like, it's available without reforms. You just need to get your level 2 barrack, and this unit just, it's like a great budget infantry unit. That's the word I was looking for. It's a great budget infantry unit. 12 melee attack and 8 melee defense means these guys can hold their own in battle. 225 men while being a medium melee infantry is great, but they don't sacrifice any javelins either, nor speed. They still have 3 speed, they still have for 1 javelin. The only real weakness that this unit has is that it doesn't have great charge, making this the type of unit that needs to grind out your opponent in battle, and they only have 10 armor. So this is kind of like a miniature Roman unit. They're comparable to like an early game Hastati, I would say, although the Hastati is just much more of a quality unit with better armor, less men of course, but you know, it's also medium. Just have better combat stats, but these guys are cheap. The Sicilian footmen, they're just cheap. They come from your 3rd population class, and they come with 225 men. So consider this like a baby Hastati. You know, they're from a less prosperous part of the country, so you kind of get more of them for less, but they don't fight as hard. But this is a great budget unit if you're trying to make a cheap army, if you're trying to make just kind of recruit a couple of units to subsidize the cost of your Sam Knights, which will be the backbone of your army. Just overall great cheap unit. Use them for what they are. Now you also have Furrow Swordsman. Now this isn't like a special Furrow sword like that of the Pergamese Furrow sword. This isn't like the Athenian Phraeus sword. This is just a generic one. I wouldn't really use this unit a whole lot unless you're just kind of trying to use this unit as like a hybrid skirmisher. You know, if you recruit these guys with your faction leader, you'll probably have 4 javelins because the faction leader just gives up a lot of buffs. So, you know, if it's in like that army and you have 4 javelins, just a regular army and you have 3, you can kind of use these guys as skirmishers, just have them in your backline, and then use them as a hybrid sword unit afterwards, because they can still pack a punch with her stats. But what I really hate about this unit is to have like the worst charge bonus I've ever seen at at 13 charge, meaning that they can only kill in protracted combat. But with only 8 armor, they won't last that long at protracted combat. So these guys are just exceptionally mediocre. They usually run before they get anything done. And I'd much rather bring your Sicilian footmen for actual fighting. But you know what? If you want a little bit of flexibility, bring them, because you don't have great skirmish capacity in this roster. That could be an excuse to bring them, and they'll be cheaper than your elite skirmishers too. So because of that, you actually might want to bring Threos swords, but that's just because you're covering for a weakness. It's not because they're actually good. And moving past this Brudian, which is a really shitty unit, don't bring these guys. There's just nothing amazing about these. Like, you don't have good charge, you don't have great melee stats, you're only medium unit, your weapon damage is terrible but not great, and 20 armor is also kind of meh. This is just such a mediocre unit. They can also form a hollow square, but that's such a useless trait for like an infantry unit. So I wouldn't bring these guys, but anyway, it's just an area of recruitment unit, so we'll kind of skip over them. Now this is your killer. Like, these 2 units are the only saving grace of the Syracusan roster. The only thing that makes this roster not just a generic Greek roster that's stuck in a horrible region. This unit's amazing. Available from turn 1, they have a monstrous 30 armor, great melee stats at 14 and 10. The only thing about this roster, this unit, which isn't great, is that it only has 16 charge bonus, but if you look at Rome's infantry, which is objectively great, you'll notice that they only have slightly more. You know, we gravitate between 17 and 20, depending on how elite their unit is, but generally they have 18, so having 15 is not... Sorry, having 16 is not horrible, just completely game-breaking. Like, no. This unit, it just isn't the type of unit that's going to have insane impact right away, but that 30 armor is so bulky. It's more army than a Roman Hastati. That is less armor than a Roman Principe, but you know what, guys? The Romans don't have Principe and Hastati from the onset, at least not the sword units. So at the beginning of your campaign, you just have a unit that's just insanely good. Like, I remember I was talking about the virtues of the Vesprotian infantry for Epirus, but, you know, this unit, the Syracusan unit, is of the same caliber, I would say. It's of the same quality. The Vesprotians are just more offensive, but these guys are more defensive, and they'll just last forever. They'll last absolutely forever, even in punishing conditions. The 30 armor is just crazy, but 10 melee defense is so good. 14 melee attack is amazing. Like, you don't find a lot of stats on turn 1 that are like this. So just an amazing, amazing unit. Spam these guys from the onset, and specifically for that relocation strategy I was talking about. There's just nothing like this in Greece when you go there. Like, the Greeks will have, hoplites and some pikes and skirmishers and stuff like that, but they won't have a melee infantry capable of competing with the Samnite medium infantry. And that's why the relocation is so strong as well. Like, this unit with this clean house there, if you know how to use melee infantry to their full capacity. Now, the only weakness of this, like I mentioned, not great as a shock unit, so you're going to have to wait a little bit of time for these guys to do their killing, meaning that the rest of your army cannot be overwhelmed in the meantime. And of course, this unit is only medium, so they aren't invulnerable to cavalry charges. They aren't invulnerable to getting run over. You know, they have the typical weaknesses that melee infantry units come with. Now, moving on, you also have these heavy infantry. These guys are just an upgrade on everything, but I already went over them. Like, this is basically like having a very good Roman infantry in late game. Like, this is better than the traitor Roman legionaries that the Ptolemies have. This is better than the Pergames have. Like, this is by far the best melee infantry that any Greek faction has, whether it's Hellenistic, whether it is Hellenic, whether it is a colonist faction. You know, the Massilian, Gallic-inspired units, or the Romanized infantrymen, they aren't as good. Let me just check that out to verify. I mean, I know it's the truth, but you can see right here, like, what they have. Some more melee attack, but weapon damage is lower. Charge bonus is lower. Just in general, everything is lower. The only thing that these guys have more of is melee attack by 1. This is better. This is not better. This is absolutely a killer unit. And because this guy has 20 charge bonus and 28 weapon damage, unlike the Samnite, which is very defensive, this one actually does have that punch. That punch when you go in. It's a really, really good unit. Just use it in abundance, guys. Like, once you get to 4x, this is the backbone of every Syracusan army, if you're not trolling. Now, moving on to your spears, you have your colonist levies. These guys are just your basic levy that has decent combat stats, although the 33 base morale is the ultimate weakness of this unit. You don't really expect much because you pay like 50 a turn to have them, but they have no ammunition, so this is just a unit that sits on your flanks and helps you deflect cavalry, helps you engage enemy levies, helps you run after enemy skirmishers. This isn't something that you dive into combat in tough situations because this morale will spell their death, their demise every single time. You have Syracuse light hoplites, like every other Greek faction that has light hoplites. This is like a pretty generic unit. They are exceptionally good against cavalry, so this is like a flank unit, but you know, can help assist you. You know, you have one of these on either flanks, and you run these guys into enemy cavalry, and these guys will clean them up, will mop them up with ease, and they have decent enough combat stats to be useful in combat in early game, although by late game, these guys will be utterly useless, will be completely irrelevant, but in early game, you can run these guys into combat in about 8, 15, 19, and 22 will make them really good. These guys will clean house against levies. They can do well enough against early game troops in general. But ultimately, this is a light unit. They're just like a little bit of flexibility. This is the helper unit, but they're not all the time useless. Just remember, 10 armor, light mass, a good but not amazing combat stats. Just once you have that picture, you'll understand their utility. Now, the Furrow Spear, I mean, come on, this is just generic. Like, again, these 3 units are just so generic. They are like the average versions of these units. So, Furrow Spears are just used on the flanks once you unlock them. That's all that they're good for. They're a cheap flank holding unit. They don't have great combat ability, but the 20 armor as well as 17 melee defense will allow these guys to hold out for a very long time. 43 base morale means that they're hardy and resilient. They come with 1 ammunition. This unit is not a god tier unit, but it is absolutely a great bit of utility that the Greek rosters in this game have. It'll just allow your flanks to hold out cheaply while your main line as well as your skirmishers and cavalry go to work for you. So yeah, once you unlock these guys will be a great help to your Samnites while you're waiting for the Syracuse and heavy infantry to be unlocked. And yeah, just this is probably what your flank will compose of because they're just so much hardier than your Sicilian footmen. Like, sure, the Sicilian footmen are cheaper, but these guys come from the same population class and they come with just better stats. Way better melee defense, 10 more armor, 1 more morale. Just these Sicilian footmen, they're not going to be killers. They're just a cost-effective unit to integrate into your army when you're low on funds. But this is just a better unit. Just a better unit. Just a better unit for doing the things that the Sicilian footmen will do. And because it has better charge bonus, I feel like these guys can just be better at like sweeping away to enemy flanks and stuff. You have a generic 4x spear. This is like the king of mediocrity when it comes to late game, and considering that you unlock them with your Syracuse and heavy infantry, don't use the 4x spear. Just don't. I don't know why the hell you use this. This is like a mediocre late game unit, while this is a god tier late game unit. And they cost similarly. Like, I don't know, if you want anti-cavalry capabilities, maybe recruit 2 of these, 1 of each to stand on the flank. Plus, these guys can hollow square, so if your flanks are getting overwhelmed, these guys can kind of hollow square just to block the enemy from pouncing. So I don't know, for a delaying action, I guess you can have one of these on each flank, but if you have these as your center line, you are trolling. Don't have these guys. Now moving on to your phalanxes, you have absolutely generic phalanxes for Syracuse, so it's not worth going over for very long. Levy hoplites are ass, don't use these guys as the main line ever. Only recruit these guys if you're trying to defend a minor settlement, just, you know, like a desperate holding action. You can have these guys, and any hoplite can do damage if the enemy attacks you directly and you're formed up, so that's really their only application. Syracuse and hoplites, generic hoplites, not worse, not better than any generic hoplite. They don't look very cool, actually. Of like any hoplite skin I've seen in this game, I feel like the Syracusan ones just look so meh. Like, we just don't look, the armor just doesn't look particularly cool. Like, it's this motley mix of like leather and kind of like rugged looking but not shiny looking chainmail armor. I mean, it kind of gives them this like medieval-esque appearance, but also makes them just look not like, they don't look glorious. They just look like guys that get the job done, you know? They look like a bunch of accountants if they became hoplites, which I guess kind of suits Syracuse, being like the center of so many mathematical ideas, the origin of so many mathematical ideas and all, but ultimately, you know, this is just not really a great unit. And considering that you have the Samnite medium infantry from turn 1, and this is just such a unique unit to have as a Greek faction, I would mostly just go for your Samnites. The most I could consider is maybe getting 3 or 4 of these, so if the enemy has phalanxes and you just want to like brush your phalanxes against, you can get a couple of these, but that's really all I would advise. Now, moving on, you have your Syracusan guards. You get these guys once you upgrade your barrack to like 3 or 4, I forget, I think it's 3. Now, you know, this is just your generic elite hoplite, meaning that they are useful, particularly as you're not going to have any more elite units coming into your roster between the beginning of the game and like Thorax, right? Because these are turn 1, and then all of your Phreos units are just kind of assistant units, you know, just kind of units to help hold your flanks and just give your army a little bit more utility, like this Phreos sword. So considering that, you know, you may consider integrating a couple of these into your faction, into your armies, and you don't have a lot of units that recruit from your noble classes, so you will have people to throw into making these. And you know, obviously this is a better unit than your Samnite as well, since it is an elite unit, so consider getting them. They are expensive to maintain and all that, but yeah, I just don't really have anything else to say about that. Like, this is an absolutely solid unit. Nobody has ever said that like elite hoplites are useless. They're just good. They're just good units. Now, moving on to your skirmishers. This is definitely one of the weaknesses of Syracuse. Syracuse does not have access to great skirmisher capacities. Like, all of your low-tier skirmishers are so generic, so weak. Your Greek Javelinman, just a shit unit. But it is a really, really cheap unit, so I guess because of that, like, you can get them. You can get them particularly because your Empire maintenance is higher, but they're just so bad. Horrible morale, 1 armor, no shield, just terrible unit. These guys are area of recruitment, so I won't go over them, but spoiler alert, this unit is not good. They're really not good. Now your Greek archer, this archer is kind of like whatever. Don't really like this archer that much, but you know, sometimes you do need to bring archers, whether it is for a defensive battle or just because you like want archers. So like, considering that archers are objectively the most useful skirmisher in Divide et Impera, I would say, you might want to bring these guys, but this is just your generic Greek archer. But 1 armor is a limitation, your 165 range is a limitation, having only 15 missile damage is a limitation. Like, this is a crap archer unit through and through. Now, Greek slingers are the best of the generic Greek roster, because at least this gives you 190 range and 11 missile damage, which is, you know, it's about as good as a skirmisher will get until you get elite skirmishers to that level. So I would recommend bringing these if you have the money for them. And that's really all I can say about this. It still has only 1 armor, but at least these guys come with a shield, so they won't die instantaneously. But also, keep in mind that slingers, while having a lot of ammunition, they do fire rather slowly, only 5 shots per minute, which is kind of bad. Now, Syracuse and Heavy Peltas, this is a late game unit, I believe. This is like a Thorax unit, so you don't get these guys for a while, but they are extremely good. 90 range and 22 missile damage is elite. Alongside that, you do have 10 melee attack, 16 melee defense, 25 weapon damage, and 30 armor. I mean, all the stats I just named there are great stats to have in a skirmisher. Just really, really good. Really, really good. Now, this is a type of skirmisher that integrates into your melee line. It just becomes a resilient part of your melee line. Like, this is not a skirmisher which is going to hit the flanks really hard, like a Thracian, like a barbarian elite skirmisher. So this is a Greek skirmisher through and through with only 15 charge bonus, but about 10, 16, and 30 makes these guys exceptionally competent. Exceptionally competent. This can handle itself against a lot of infantry in the game. Yeah, this won't kill like an elite late game swordsman from like a Germanic faction or whatever, but you know, it gets to kind of composite, the kind of inconsistent armies the AI creates where we integrate really good units with some really bad units. You know, I'm sure you will find ample use for these guys. Now, the very unique unit that Syracuse gets are these crossbowmen. And I don't particularly value this unit all that much, to be honest. I don't think that is particularly good, because it only shoots at 4 shots per minute. This is a very slow firing unit. It fires slower than generic archers, but against elite archers, you just can't compare the rate of fire. Now, it does have 200 range, which is great, as well as 22 missile damage. So these guys do kill at a range and do a lot of damage. And particularly if you can get these guys on the flanks, then these guys can do great damage. Although you do have to be cautious. You do have to be cautious because these guys don't have great melee stats. Like, we don't have horrendous melee stats with 20 armor, you know, 9-7 for attack and defense, and 23 weapon damage. So they can kind of handle themselves, although they're not going to do well in the charge. So this isn't like the type of unit that you'd be like charging into the flanks of your opponent. This is just a type of unit that's going to like hold its own if it gets charged for at least like a little bit. But, you know, these melee stats aren't great, so if you leave them out on an island, then these guys can't get overwhelmed and killed by some pretty basic units. But, you know, 22 missile damage is good. It definitely is good. So, this unit is kind of like a bolt thrower. It's kind of like a bolt thrower, but, like, you know, they have 131 men, and it's a skirmisher unit. They are very, very expensive, mind you. But from a range, they can do some damage. It's just, this isn't like a broken unit by any means. I'm going to say this. Like, I have tested them out. They will kill, don't get me wrong, but they won't break the game for you. For a fun accessory to a late game army. Like, if you have one of these guys, and they kind of like act as like, you know, as like an alternative to artillery, that's kind of how you would use them. Like, this is like one unit that you have, which is like a minute X factor. You know, if you line these guys up and you use them to, like, snipe, like, a Thracian Romphia or, like, a Dacian Valksman or something, they do well. They do well. That would be a cool use of this unit. But they're a fun little quirk. They're not an absolute game-breaking unit. Now, moving on to your cavalry is really meh as Syracuse. Really, really, really meh. You have some units that are useful, but just in general, this is just a meh. Tarentine Cavalry, super generic. Almost every Greek faction has these guys on tap. These guys have 90 men. Yeah, they're kind of like an alternative to Citizen Cavalry, where they aren't as competent at melee as Citizen Cavalry, but these guys have more utility since they have some more ammunition, some more speed, and more men. Moving on to your Syracusan Citizen, this is your generic Citizen Cavalry. They have the same stats as almost every Citizen Cavalry in the game. This is a useful unit, but it's not an amazing unit. The 47 charge bonus means that this unit can be used for Hammer and Anvil. The 8 and 13 here on melee attack and defense means that this unit can be used to challenge enemy cavalry, particularly Lancers and melee. But because none of these stats are exceptional, they won't ever perform amazingly against, you know, better cavalry. But this is basically a jack of all trades. Now, if you do kind of go for your more elite cavalry, the cavalry that comes from your noble population, you do have a Lancer cavalry. This unit isn't the best Lancer because it has only 13 melee attack and 57 charge bonus compared to 15 and 60 that you can get on the better units. But this unit is very heavily armored. If you do take care of themselves at 41 armor, making this a pretty resilient Lancer, but this isn't the most competent Lancer in the world. This is just a usable, decent Lancer. They are very expensive. They do come from your elites. But if you want a Lancer, take this. This is basically your only option. And it will do the job, but it'll get outperformed by like Bactrian, Seleucid, Macedonian, by basically any Hellenistic faction that uses Lancers in abundance. And your Syracuse and Royal Cavalry, as I mentioned before, this is just like an upgrade on your citizens when it comes to like your melee capabilities, because it has more armor, it has better melee stats, better weapon damage. Its weapon damage of 32 is elite, but the 40 charge bonus makes this unit pretty bad at hammer and anvil. Like, this is solely a fighting other cavalry unit and maybe picking off like lighter infantry in melee combat, but this is absolutely not a hammer and anvil unit. I mean, you know, it can do hammer and anvil because any cavalry can, but that's a usage of this cavalry. Just as you go here, like, you don't have any options which are like amazing. You don't have any options that like you really want. Like, you just have units that work, that do the role. Now for missiles, you have these two really bad javelin cavalry. Every Greek faction has them. I hate these units. They're like poor morale as well as poor melee stats. Just make them super unappealing. Like, sure, you can use them. Like, they can hunt down skirmishers. They can do like your basic thing. But ultimately, that is basically all that their use is. They're just units that exist. They're not great. And then you have your Sicilian horsemen, which are actually an interesting hybrid unit because they have exceptional speed, as well as their skirmish ability is the same as the other ones, but then, you know, they have better charge, they have better melee attack, the same melee defense as these Feroz units. Like, basically a bit of an upgrade, but they're also very expensive. They're very expensive and not that great at melee, and they still have low armor. Like, I don't know, I've seen some hybrid javelin cavalry that are just way better than this. This is kind of like a poor version of some of the other ones I've seen. You can use them, like, this is a versatile unit that comes in fast with javelins and, you know, ultimately can fight in melee. But don't consider this unit to be like great or anything like that. It's just okay. So speaking of that, how would I rate the Syracusan roster as well as their campaign in general? Well, you know what? This is just a nightmare of a campaign. Like, you have a couple of melee units that give you a chance to win, but ultimately this is like an insanely hard campaign, alright? Just because of the start position, you're going to be at war with two empires at the beginning, and that inevitably puts them at a 10 out of 10 on difficulty. And in terms of how hard this roster is, how good this roster is, outside of having like these two melee units, everything else is either average or below average, making this roster crap. It is a 3 out of 10 roster. In terms of how much you need to play this campaign, you know, I would say that just because it is the hardest campaign in Divide et Impera that I've yet to rate, I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. But that's solely because this is a flex. If you can win this campaign, then you are amongst the best campaign players that have picked up Divide et Impera. That's what this is. This is your YouTube challenge of a campaign. And that's really all that it is, guys. Especially if you can keep Syracuse for the whole campaign, that would be like nightmare difficulty Rome 2. So that's where you have it. That's where Syracuse stands. And I hope you enjoyed the guide. We're running to the very end of our Hellenistic factions. All that's left to do is Syracuse. And I believe, yeah, I think all that's left is... Wait, no, sorry. Syracuse. You know, I've been rambling for like the last hour, so... yeah, I'll mess some things up. I think the Seleucids are the only faction left from the Hellenistic and Hellenic factions, as far as I remember. Yeah, the Seleucids, and I'm still going to do the RDA, because I've almost wrapped up the Balkan factions as well, and then we can move on to the Barbarian and Eastern kingdoms. So stay tuned for those faction guides, and yeah, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.